Hello, concerned citizens. My name is Veronica. Welcome to Saving Gen Z. I created Gen Z to help awaken the world to the dangers facing our children. Disclaimer. This video is not meant to bully, harass, or incite violence of any kind. I am a qualified medical and therapeutic professional, but the statements made in this video are not meant to be substituted for your or your child's private physician or therapist care. The materials used in the making of this video is permitted under the Fair Use Act. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share the videos. This helps promote the channel and educate the masses. Thank you, subscribers and supporters. Please help me support this channel by purchasing some merch or one of my best-selling books and become a Patreon. I hold monthly giveaways on Patreon and post bonus material. You can also follow me on Twitter. All links will be in the description box below. Now let's join together and build a better today so we can have a better tomorrow by questioning the narrative. Hello and welcome to Saving Gen Z. My name is Veronica. This is my very first video on Saving Gen Z. A little about me. I'm a registered nurse. I also was a counselor at a lockdown adolescent psych facility. I'm also a mom of a Generation Zer and a Generation Yer, a millennium. And I also have a grandmother. I'm also a grandmother. Pregnant pause. Pregnant pause. Pregnant pause. Yes. But I don't use that word. I use Mimi. Okay? That's more suited for me. And I really wanted to make this channel because of the times that we're in. Okay? If you're here, you have an understanding that the children of this world are children, grandchildren, even if you're not a mom and aunt, you know the Generation Z is being attacked. Generation Z is on serious attack right now, and they're being attacked by all the different narratives that are being pushed out to them, to their parents. They're being bombarded through the educational system. They're being bombarded on the TV, on the computer. Okay, and it would be terrible it would be remiss of me to completely ignore it, considering my educational background and my employment background and my life experience, to just let something like this go. Okay, I know the idea of kids being hurt, kids being manipulated, kids being abused and used is a topic that's almost taboo still. Even though people are very well aware it's going on, they want to turn a blind eye to it. This is not something that's going to go away on its own. It's something that we must address. The observer is the controller, okay? If those of us with good hearts could observe such ugliness, we could change it. We can transmute it. We can make it something completely different. Okay, so that is where I'm coming from. I worked in an lockdown adolescent psych facility, and I was part-time employee health nurse, and I was part-time group counselor. And the majority of these children, and I'm talking 90%, came from very abusive backgrounds. And about 75% of them were trafficking victims, child trafficking victims, who were pimped, sold, and molested by their own parents, who were imported here, also part of trafficking rings. And they were actually a good 20% who were used in sacrificial, satanic rings, that type of thing. Also, for 3 months when I first started working there, I cried for 3 months. Okay. I also was a pediatric nurse. I've been a nurse for over 16 years, and the majority of my career was spent in pediatrics. And I've worked everywhere. The age range I worked from was all the way from preemie, micro neonates, to adolescents, teenagers. Worked on every unit possible. Okay, and I even worked I worked in a special needs nursery, which all the strange, crazy birth defects you could think of. I'm talking 3 legs, 4 arms, trisomies, all these different type of things you could imagine I have seen. So I can stomach all that, okay? But it is necessary now for everyone else to wake up and to be able to see what's going on, because that is the only way we're going to be able to change what's going on. This is bringing it into the light is the only way to build a better future. Okay? We can't change things. It's not about changing it even. It's about completely getting rid of the old and building the new. Okay? So you must see what's going on in order to change it. So I'm here to bluntly put it out there, okay, what the agendas are that are being used against Gen Z, being used against the children, okay? I'm here to put it out there, what is going on right now, not just the agendas, what has been going on for the longest, okay? So I hope you can hang in there and stick with me and share these videos. It's very important because I already know, so I'm not going to be up there in the algorithms. So the only way to get the message out is by actually sharing it. So please share, okay? On the 15th, today is the 18th of October 2019. This is video 1 in a 2-part series. And it's based on perversion of justice. Got an invite from the Miami Herald. I went there the other day, which was on the 15th of October. And it was to discuss trafficking, human trafficking. And it was really great speakers. It was the original, the 2-woman crew that kept on the Jeffrey Epstein case. I'm in Miami. Okay, and these the reporter Julie K. Brown, she's the investigative reporter of the Miami Herald, and Emily Machat, M-I-C-H-O-T, yeah, Machat, Emily Machat. She's the visual journalist at the Miami Herald, and these 2 women worked together tirelessly to not let the Jeffrey Epstein case die, to keep on the Epstein case, because it was so important, because they understood the connections that Jeffrey Epstein had, that it wasn't just some perverted dude somewhere in Palm Beach, some billionaire in Palm Beach molesting young girls and models, okay? It's an entire network. And that is what people need to wrap their heads around, that it's not these isolated incidents. Are there isolated incidents? Of course. But the bigger scope, the bigger picture is that this is a worldwide thing. And it's all interconnected. Okay? And it's satanic ritual abuse. That is what this is all based on. Okay, so I will share part 1 videos with you right now, and it is Aminda. No, that's not her. This is doing the interview. The moderator is Nancy Akram. She is an editorial page editor of the Miami Herald. So it's Nancy Akram. She is the lady doing the moderating and speaking to these 2 reporters in reference to their experience with the Epstein victims and you'll actually see interviews with the Epstein victims. So yes, I was there live, and I'm sorry about the audio. Even though I was right on the front row, I was in the second row, it's not 100%, so crank it up, and I'll do my best to crank it up on my end so you won't have an issue hearing it, okay? And we will have a discussion afterwards. Enjoy the video.
From some excellent investigative journalism.
This scandal was forced onto the national news radar by one newspaper, the Miami Herald, and by one reporter in particular, Julie K. Brown.
It really is. They were very scared to talk. You know, this is a man that has a lot of power. It happened a long time ago. These women moved on with their lives, and so for them to share their stories with me was just an incredible honor. They're just shocked that it has really made a difference and that something might be done for justice that they've been fighting for so long.
This morning, there are more questions than answers in the case against Jeffrey Epstein and his apparent suicide in Manhattan jail over the weekend.
The jail system let us down, the government let us down. We should be having our day in court with Epstein.
This whole case has been so corrupted and just so influenced by money and power. Justice definitely was never served.
We all know Epstein did not act alone. We were all brought in by somebody else other than Epstein. But by friends, by motherly-looking people such as Ghislaine Maxwell. Now what are we going to do to hold these monsters accountable?
And now, I'd like to introduce our first panel for tonight's program. Miami Herald investigative reporter Julie K. Brown. Visual journalist Emily in the show. They, as you know, were the driving force behind the Progression of Justice investigation, and I'm proud to call them my colleagues. And let's give them a warm welcome. And I'll turn the mic over to Nancy.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to see all of you here. And it's wonderful to see all of you here. I'm going to dive right in because this is such an important story and all of our panelists tonight have such important and valuable information to impart. Julie, I'm going to ask you the first question. For all the praise and all of the recognition that you have received for this story and also for the results of this story, you very humbly give all of that recognition to the victims. Can you, who are still in their quest for justice, talk about who and what really got this story going to the extent that you were able to take it?
Well, I had been aware, I have covered Florida prisons for a number of years, and part of the stories that Emily and I had worked on was covering the women's prison in Central Florida, which is at the time the largest women's prison in the country. And from talking to inmates and former inmates at that prison, we knew that many of them had been trafficked. So I decided that I wanted to do something on trafficking, and it occurred to me that a lot of the prosecution of so-called sex traffickers involved sort of one man who trafficked two women, for example. There was a lot of authorities putting out press releases like, wow, we got this big sex trafficker. And yet, when I saw stories about Jeffrey Epstein, who molested dozens of women, somehow he had, fallen into sort of a footnote of history. It just seemed like I could never quite understand why this story kind of disappeared into the headlines and that no one seemed to investigate how it had happened, that he had gotten really what amounts to the most lenient plea deal for a child sex offender probably in history. And so, as I said, I just kept looking at it, and then President Trump nominated him as Labor Secretary, and I thought, well, I wonder what these victims who are now in their late 20s, early 30s, I wonder what they think about this. And that's how it started. I decided I would try to track them down.
You tried to track them down, but getting them to talk was the real breakthrough. Talk about what it took to get someone to go on the record.
Yeah. Well, you know, I did prepare. I interviewed some people who were more experienced at interviewing trauma victims, especially victims of child trauma, which that's what this amounted to. These, for the most part, were girls who were 13, 14, 15 years old when this happened. And you know, you just can't just call them up with a phone and say, hey, you know, talk to me about the darkest, worst part of your life. So I decided to write them all letters. I got a list together, which took quite a long time because these women had, you know, gone on with their lives and moved all the way around the country and even in some cases abroad. So it took me a while to even find them because remember, they were minors when this happened, so none of their names were in any of the documents. They were blacked out, you know, and they were listed as Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, all the way to Jane Doe 102, you know. Wow. So it did take quite a long time, for several months, for me to get a list together. And then once I got the list together, I decided to write them a letter. And the way that I approached it was, you know, this story has been told from a very almost salacious point of view in the past, and I don't want to do that. I want to talk about the breakdown of the criminal justice system and what went wrong. And a couple of the women who did respond said, I have been waiting for years for someone, a reporter, to talk about that very topic, because it just seems to me that all the stories that were written were about the Lolita Express and how he's a billionaire and he has a private island, and it was this, you know, storyline that really involved a lot of salacious details and did not address what I felt was the most important thing that wasn't being talked about, and that was how did these prosecutors really let him off the hook, essentially.
Emily, you had to tell this same story, but using different media. You had to use images, you had to animate the victims. Can you talk about how you made that happen? How did you build a rapport with them so that you could do what you had to do in terms of storytelling through images?
I think this particular project, like so many of the investigative stories that I work on with our incredible investigative team at the Miami Herald, was another prime example. I have a photojournalist background. I started with taking pictures and had to learn later on to do video, and it's not always easy, and it's you know, it adds a lot to the workflow, the long days, but this kind of story can't be told without hearing from the women themselves, and those voices were so powerful, and I didn't have to do too much. You know, I think they told the story and they made the impact. So thank goodness, you know, we've moved into that medium because it's so important to hear it from themselves. Julie's reporting is super powerful, but if you don't have the sound of those voices and the raw emotion that was coming out of them, finally telling this painful time in their lives, it was a really difficult thing to do. I didn't really get training on really how to do it. I mean, as photographers, we kind of do learn to stay in the background and disappear a little bit. We kind of do that with video too, especially the first interview we did. I had a bunch of lights with me and I had a couple of cameras, and I realized like right away, like, I don't think I want to do all that. I want to, like, there's some good light in here naturally. I'm just gonna set up, you know, as little as I can and try to just back off, because it was really tough. But
so you were concerned about you being an intimidating presence.
And it was really interesting because I wasn't sure, but I mean, I kind of felt that way. And then we had the pleasure, just the absolute honor of being with those young women again a couple of weeks ago in New York City. That's in that video. That was the first time we'd seen them all together. again. And Michelle actually said, she said, oh, other people are like, trying to get in touch with us and they're interviewing us and, they're like coming in with all these like lights, cameras, action, and a crew, and it's not like when they came out and they just were so kind. And so you really do have to really tread lightly, and I think we both worked well together to do that. I think something about being moms ourselves, of teenagers at the time, and having been high school girls at one point in time, I think they kind of felt like they could talk to us, and I appreciate that.
Julie, I don't want to get into the weeds, but I do want to ask you, how did you go from 102 Jane Does to unearthing actual names so that you could find them to send them letters?
Oh gosh, that's a long story. I mean, it's just a lot of work. It's just, tedious. Everybody thinks of investigative journalism probably as very glamorous, but it is a lot of burning your head in court documents and, police reports and, there was, fortunately there were a lot of court records because these women, many of them had sued Epstein over the years, so there was like 25, 30 court cases. But these court cases, some of them lasted for years and years and years, so you can imagine how many pages of documents. So you start reading, and inevitably there's one name, one name kind of leads to another name, because remember, his whole process was that he got a foothold into one high school, for example, and once he got one girl to come, and these were all vulnerable girls, by the way. They were girls who, had been sort of living almost, under, either they were homeless or they were on the verge of homelessness or they were barely surviving. Their parents perhaps had drug addictions. So they needed money. One of the girls told me in the series, which was one of the most powerful things I think that someone said, was, we were, she's speaking now as a 30-year-old woman. She said, we were stupid, stupid children. All I remember thinking was that I'd been wearing the same pair of shoes for 3 years, and I just thought if I went, because the idea was that they were going to be paid to give this man a massage, and she said all I thought was I would get a couple $100 and maybe I would be able to buy a new pair of shoes. And so these girls all sort of, they didn't all know each other, but it was sort of like this web. And once he got in and he got a couple of girls, then what he would say was, I'll give you the same amount of money for every other girl you give me. It was a very insidious way, really, to do this, because he also, in essence, turned them all against each other in a way, because when everything was said and done, all the girls were blaming you brought me, you should have never brought me. Some of them didn't really know what they were confronting until they got there. Some of them did know, but really didn't realize how bad it was going to be. So, it was, once I found a couple of them, then I was able to find out who their friends were. And, you use yearbooks, Facebook, a whole series of other techniques that you try to track people down. That's basically how I did it.
Through all of your reporting, did Alex Acosta, the former U.S. attorney, ever talk to you, ever reach out to you?
No, I tried over and over and over again. He really, not only did he just not talk to me, but he sort of said, well, you got to talk to the U.S. Attorney's Office of Miami. I had nothing to do with it, which was not true, because he absolutely did have a lot to do with it. So there was a little bit of casting the buck, even though the U.S. Attorney's Office now in Miami obviously didn't handle the case that happened in 2007.
Right. And I want to ask you both, how did you ground yourself to be able to do this story and to perhaps be able to sleep at night, to be able to continue with the rest of your life? The stories were, no, he didn't. The stories were so painful and horrific, and you were sympathetic and you wanted to convey convey that. How were you able to do that?
Well, I mean, thanks to Julie, she's an amazing, not only reporting partner, but friend, and I think anytime we were really feeling down or low or stuck, you know, we could call each other and talk, and, you know, same with my family, and just distracting at times to go home and walk the dogs and, you know, do something with the kids, and, but they do stay with you, you know, it really does, and I was also saying, like, with video, how amazing it is, but it's also really hard because you get really into audio and you get really into these fine edits and you just keep hearing those hardest quotes again and again, and somebody will say something, it'll just kind of, you know, remind you of it. And so when you kind of worry about them, you know, and you hope that they're doing well, and, you know, it was so great seeing them again, because I think this whole thing, as hard as it's been and as unexpected as, you know, him killing himself, it did bring the young women together. When they had the hearing, they found this bonding moment, and I think that's just so incredible to see. So there's this lightness at the end where you see that and you feel like, okay, you know, like that's really great that they found each other and they found support, and, you know, we have support. And
I also think that just the quest to, you know, unravel the truth in it, also, you know, the sadness of it made me mad, and then that made me want to work even harder to get to the truth. You know, so I'm sort of driven by the fact that we've got to find out why this happened. So you know, you don't let the sadness or the emotion get you down. You know, like they say, you get mad and you just work harder. You know.
Talk a little more about, you said earlier that you really talked to people who were much more expert in talking to people who had undergone trauma. Can you talk a little more about what you learned that allowed you to proceed and do very informed and sensitive interviews?
Well, one of the people that I spoke to, who happens to be on the next panel, Marcy Hamilton, who had handled a number of cases involving the Catholic Church, she talked a lot about, for example, the way that a young person, a child's mind is not fully developed. So to think that these, you know, in some cases, these girls were kind of treated as prostitutes because they got money for this. And so this is sort of part of the problem here when we think of girls, you know, yes, they're getting paid, but they're being exploited and they're underage, and they really, you know, your mind isn't fully developed at 13, so you don't understand the consequences to some degree. So you know, watching them blame themselves was probably the hardest part for me to watch. You know, when they were blaming themselves, because it's not their fault, but they were meant to, you know, they were treated as if they were prostitutes. So I think the thing that I had as my advantage was I didn't need for them to talk about their trauma again, as far as, you know, how they were molested. They didn't have to talk to me. I said, you don't have to talk to me about any of this. I just want to know what your thoughts are about Alex Acosta and how the prosecutors handled this. And ultimately, I think that very, you know, that I was taking this a different direction, that they were almost eager to finally talk about that part of it. In other words, I wasn't going to dwell on exactly how did it happen or any of the sex parts of it. I thought it was much more important for them to tell me, well, were the prosecutors in touch with you? No, they wouldn't return my phone calls. When was the first time you realized you pleaded guilty? I didn't realize until weeks after it happened. Didn't your lawyer tell you? Well, my lawyer didn't know either. I mean, it was a whole aspect of the story that really wasn't told before outside of the trauma part of it. So I think because, you know, we were focusing on a different aspect of it, I think that helped them feel a little more comfortable too.
You know, after the Parkland, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas massacre last year, the state, though reluctantly changed a number of laws regarding access to guns, mental health treatment, and so on. What needs to change in this state in terms of the laws that are available to prevent a case like this from happening again? And I understand that it was also, Acosta was a federal attorney, was a U.S. attorney. But if you can bring it back to Florida, and Florida did play a role in terms of the sheriff in Palm Beach County, what needs to happen?
Well, I think that our lawmakers need to look comprehensively at our laws involving children and sex crimes. Statutes of limitations, which I know Marcy's going to talk about that in the next panel, are problematic in a lot of places. And as well as the aspect of Epstein was a sex offender, but he didn't seem to have to follow the rules of other sex offenders in Florida. So, there has to be some consequences for some of the officials that seem to ignore what laws we do have in place, let alone making new laws. I mean, there were laws in this case that they didn't follow, and there was no consequences for them not following it. It's almost as if, okay, we don't have to follow them. And I don't think enough has been done statewide, anyway. I haven't heard of anything to change our laws here in Florida or improve them or add teeth to some of them in some cases. Now, in the federal, I've been talking to federal lawmakers across the country, and there is a movement to pass some new legislation which will make sex traffickers, the Crime Victims' Rights Act, more enforceable and more, that there will be people that will have certain markers that they have to meet when they have a case like this. In other words, they're going to have to tell the victims, what's going on in the case. They're going to have to. And if they don't, there will be consequences. And part of the problem with this is prosecutors violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act, but they weren't ever held accountable. And it was like, so what? We violated the law, oh well. And so I know that there is talk in Congress right now as of today, about passing some kind of a reform to the current Crime Victims' Rights Act.
What were your first thoughts when Alex Acosta resigned?
By that time, I wasn't really surprised because remember, he had that press conference the day before, and some of the things that he said at that press conference was awful. It was. I mean, I think he did himself in. There was so many answers that he provided that weren't answers at all. So I wasn't surprised. I was surprised it happened so quick after the press conference, but I wasn't surprised by that time that he was probably there was so much pressure for him to resign. It's funny, when I first started this project, one of the things that investigative journalists, especially on a small staff like the Miami Herald, is we contact other people that either work for the Herald or that we know, and kind of run the ideas by them, right? And I had met with a former investigations reporter, Mike Sala, early on in the project to tell him, oh, here's the story I have. And after I explained it to him, he said to me, Alex Acosta is going to have to resign. This is like early on, and really smart, I guess, because I said, no way, he's never going to have to resign. He's going to get, Epstein's never going to get arrested. So you can see how much confidence I had at the time. But he saw, when I told him what I had, he said, this is going to be a great story. He's going to have to resign.
Emily, what did you think when Acosta resigned?
I guess same with Julie, because we were in New York City when all that was happening, and all the channels were clamoring to have her on for the announcement. It just felt like something big was going to happen. I don't think it was a big surprise at that point. But
and same question, different person. Jeffrey Epstein's suicide. I don't think for many journalists there was a celebratory aspect to it, but
and also from the victims certainly. The first thing I did was call Jenna and the other victims because I knew that they would be upset, not because necessarily that he was gone, but just because once again, they had been robbed of, their day in court and their, the justice that they had sought, that they were so close to almost. It seemed like it was almost within reach after all these years. So I think that I felt more than anything, sadness for the women, because I knew that it was something that was going to affect them, make them angry and upset all at the same time.
I would say a day or so after he killed himself, somebody had said, "Oh wow, that's crazy. How are you feeling? Like, do you feel responsible for his death?" And I know I was taken aback, but at the same time, there was a little bit of that in the back of my head just playing anyway. Like, would this man still be alive had we not done the story? Most likely, but would he still be living that life and most likely still abusing young women? Most likely. So it's not that anybody's happy that it happened, but I don't feel, we're responsible for that. We're just responsible for getting the reporting out there and getting the women's stories out there and finding a path to some sort of justice.
Can you talk about your working relationship? This is not the first story that you've worked on, probably the most notorious, but talk about your working relationship. You've worked on other stories together, other investigative pieces.
We have, and it's always it's really just an honor and a privilege to work with Julie, and we're very different. I think Julie's she's small but mighty and brave, and she just forges ahead, and I'm always like, well, let's think about this for a minute, so I think I've learned a lot from her. I think I found a little more of that braveness and courage in myself too, to speak up a little bit more, and hopefully, maybe I've reined her in a little bit on occasion, but not too often. No, she's just, she's wonderful to work with.
Yeah, she keeps me on the straight and narrow. It's wonderful working with her because she's visual. I'm a written word, and I actually write with my ear. So I think in audio, and she thinks a little bit more, even though we did we have the video, she sees things visually, and often actually she'll put something in a video in the documentary, and I'll look at it, and I didn't even notice that when I was, she'll notice things that I didn't pick up on, and I'll be like, oh, I didn't see that part of it, I didn't realize that. So we, like she said, we really work well together because we balance each other out.
Fill each other's blanks. What's next for this case, specifically in Florida, and regarding the victims who are here in Florida? What do you think you have to pursue in really trying to get to justice for these women?
Well, there are at least 3, I think, investigations going on. 2 of them are federal, and one of them is with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. That one is, I think, very important because it is going to examine why, Epstein should have been prosecuted from the get-go by the state prosecutor. And the state prosecutor initially was gung-ho about, before he realized who Epstein was, he was ready to go after him. Then all of a sudden, Epstein hired all these big-time attorneys, and all of a sudden the state prosecutor in Palm Beach said he didn't want to prosecute him. And then when it was all said and done and he pleaded to this cushy deal where he was allowed to stay in the Palm Beach County Jail, he also got all these privileges that allowed him to leave the jail every single day. And so someone really needs to look at how that happened and why it happened. He had tried to influence Palm Beach police who were investigating the case on the island of Palm Beach. He had donated a lot of money to the police department in an effort to, I think, get some influence there. Several of the women have told us that Epstein would brag that he had the Palm Beach police in his pocket. He really didn't have obviously the Palm Beach police department in his pocket because they went after him and they gave back the money that he donated. But the Palm Beach Sheriff's Department, which is the one that oversaw his his jail, his incarceration.
And make sure he's still in office.
Yeah, and he's running for re-election. Somehow gave him a lot of benefits, and I don't know, it's just not a stretch to me to think that he gave money to that law enforcement agency, because he did try to give money to the town of Palm Beach Police. So I think that there was something that happened, and we don't know what it is, and I think we have to count on the Florida Department of Investigation to try to get to the bottom of it.
I'm going to take some questions from the audience. I have them right here. Thank you for filling these out. This question is, for Julie, how are the victims coping?
I think they're getting stronger every day. I think that, as Emily mentioned, when they had this court hearing in New York recently, and they were able to actually talk about what happened, I think that there was somewhat of a healing process in that they could bond with other women that had gone through the same thing. And so I think that helped. I think also the way that our country has, to some degree, responded positively and embraced them in a lot of ways. I got a lot of, usually reporters don't get fan mail, we get, the opposite of fan mail. So, this was quite an experience actually getting kind of fan mail, and I know that I heard from a lot of other sexual assault survivors from around the country, and really around the globe, who felt like finally, here's some victims that were able to talk, that he gave a voice to. So I think it helped them it was somewhat cathartic to watch this whole thing played out for them. And, I do think that they, from talking to them, they seem stronger every day, I sense.
I do, and I remember Virginia, that first time we talked to Virginia Roberts, and she said at the end, because like Julie said, she started reporting this before the Me Too movement, but the Me Too movement had begun when we did interview some of them, and I remember Virginia at the end saying, I know we're not like Olympic gymnasts, and I know we're not famous, but maybe we can get together, and maybe we can speak up, and we can have each other's backs, and we can kind of find our own like Me Too movement. And I think they've accomplished that and are working towards that.
How do you think women, young women, older women, can find their voice the way these young women did, when the people who are abusing them are not rich, are not famous, are not well connected, are not names in the news? How can they find strength from what you've done and what these young women have done?
Well, every person's different in the ways that they cope with trauma or tragedy, and so it would be different for every person. But I just know that I think that these women, it's hard because I think, especially women of color or women that come from, disadvantaged background, they really aren't listened to as much. Police don't treat them the same. Just even their communities don't look at it the same. So I do think that we need to strengthen our structure of how to use, especially with young people. I don't think that there are enough resources out there. I don't think there's enough safe places for them to go. They are fearful sometimes of their abuser and what their abuser is going to do. I think we've gotten a little bit better, but I still think we have a long way to go to try to find some kind of a way for sexual assault survivors to feel like they're safe going to some organization or some place that is equipped to deal with this. I think law enforcement needs to have better training. I think that prosecutors need to have better training. This is really an epidemic, this sexual assault, especially of young people. And I think the only way to address this, we have to address it like we do anything else, like gun violence or anything else. We have to look at it from a more of a global solution to the problem.
An audience member asks you, Julie, when did it hit you? At what point did it hit you that this was a story with far broader, rippling ramifications.
It hit us. We were moving so fast, I don't think it hit us until after he committed suicide. We were just moving so fast and trying to keep up with the story, because once Acosta resigned and he was arrested, then you have to remember the whole world was on the story. And for us two reporters to try to keep up with the New York Times, Washington Post, every single CNN, NBC, everybody was on the story then, and it was, it was just dizzying. We were trying to keep up with everything, and there were a few moments we would sit and take a deep breath and we go, wow, what just happened, But, it's been really heartening to see that one of the outgrowths that I didn't expect, I didn't in my wildest dreams imagine that somehow this would help investigative journalism. I didn't think of it at all. And, the amount of support, in ways big and small that we've received for, not just for the fact that we've reported out this very important story, but just for investigative reporting, at a time when our nation is so divided and, we have a president that often refers to the news media in negative ways. I think a lot of people looked at this and said, look, this is what journalists can do. This is what we do. We try to, find the truth. We really try to hold people accountable. So, I think that this story showed that at a time when I think the public needed to hear it.
Referenced in the video just now.
I can't comment on that.
Okay. Was it murder or suicide?
I don't really know, but I probably know a lot about Jeffrey Epstein more than most people want to know. My guess is that it was assisted suicide, because I don't think we would have been able to do something like that on its own.
I think I agree with Julie. I don't think he was murdered. I think it was pretty clear he wasn't going to be able to cope with spending much more time in that jail situation, and that he was revising his will, and it was all like leading up to, and we knew 2 weeks prior that he had attempted. So it was surprising that it was allowed to have happened, but it wasn't really a surprising outcome.
So this is a little longish. Epstein went to jail in 2008. Why did it take 10 years for a story to come out? There are thousands of reporters in this country. Thank you, Miami Herald. But why 10 years?
Well, in reality, a lot of reporting has been done on this story over the 10-year period. It was, and then of course, after several years, then you would get a story, once every 3 years maybe. So there was a lot of reporting. But the way that I looked at it was, I never really had the answers that I thought I wanted to know about it. I had so many questions that I didn't see answers for. And so I kind of looked at it like a cold case detective does. When you come in and you just empty all the boxes again and you start all over. And, sometimes when you do that years later, you find other witnesses, for example, that maybe weren't found the first time, or in this case, for example, the victims are older, they're now willing to talk. There was a lot of new information contained in court documents. And so what I did was I sort of just spread it all out and started all over from scratch. And I think in doing that, you're putting the puzzle pieces together in a different way, and it came together in a different story. I had the advantage of time, I think. So in some ways, the 10-year period allowed us to understand what had happened even more fully.
I think the beauty of this story is that politics didn't quite have a chance to rear its ugly head. There were just a bipartisan group of powerful men on that plane to that island.
Right.
Did politics at all ever impede your reporting?
Well, nothing really impedes my reporting. But you know, there was some pressure. You know, you want to make sure you get every angle. So there was some pressure to go down that rabbit hole, as you said, and to sort of look for these players that you know were involved, and to, find out how involved they were. And what I needed to do was not jump through a million rabbit holes. I came to the conclusion pretty early on that, this case involved bad behavior on both sides of the political aisle. And I thought it was more important to focus on the behavior and the mistakes than it was to ferret out one particular person and try to nail that person. Because I thought that, I had to have some corners to this story, and so I made a decision early on. Now, that's not to say that since then, now we know more information. I was very fortunate to have the Miami Herald agreed to file a motion in New York court to unseal some records. One of the other tragedies in this story was that our judiciary agreed to seal so many documents as all these lawsuits were filed, and they just blindly sealed them. So we decided that we were going to try to unseal one of those cases. And so our lawyer, Sandy Boer, who's here somewhere, went to court, and it was actually, I almost felt like crying hearing him argue for freedom of the press on this case, and some of those documents indeed have since been unsealed and revealing more and more information. So that was a long way of saying we're not finished with this story yet, so we'll see who falls, because there will be
and
other
why people. Haven't other people fallen or at least been charged, just like Maxwell and others, who clearly, from documents, from testimony from victims, was deeply involved? Not to imply guilt or innocence, but at least charges could be filed, don't you think?
Well, I know that they're working very hard on it. I think they want to do it right. The first case was obviously a big scandal and a big mess. Jeffrey Berman is very committed to, to going after the other accomplices that were involved in this. And I think he just wants to make sure that he does it the right way and that they don't get off again, because that would be even worse for these women. So I do think that they're... I also know that in Paris, the Paris authorities have found a lot of victims over there. And they seem very committed to bring one of his alleged accomplices in Paris to justice. So, as I said, this is not the end of this story. There are a lot of different, in New Mexico, they're looking at, crimes that he committed there, the U.S. Virgin Islands, there are other places where authorities are looking, and I think they want to do this case right. And it is a massive case. It's not something you just bring. Anybody who's in the audience who's a lawyer knows that this isn't something you want to cut corners on. You want to make sure you get all your ducks in a row.
Last question for the two of you, perhaps a young journalist seeking guidance. Emily, how do young journalists or young wannabe journalists get to do what you want to do, what you have done as visual artists, as visual journalists?
I was really fortunate I've been with the Miami Herald for 25 years. I was really fortunate to have a wonderful internship and get hired right out of school, and it is such a dream, and I hope that, I think internships are an amazing thing, and the Miami Herald offers plenty of those sort of opportunities, as I know other organizations do as well. So that just getting your foot in the door and making contact with journalists, where all of our emails are now pretty much on all the work we do, and we try really hard to get back to people, so don't be afraid to reach out. We'd be happy to hear from you and encourage you, and I think that's that's the best thing to do, is to try to find somebody that can, kind of be your mentor.
Julie, for the dogged young reporter who wants to be an investigative journalist?
I think that if you love what you do, I love what I do, and if you have a passion for it, you find a way to do it. My first, I worked my way up from the tiniest paper in Lambertville, New Jersey, and I waitressed on weekends because I couldn't earn a living working as a weekly newspaper reporter. So most of my career I had a second job. So you have to be willing to, be a starving artist, so to speak. But if you love what you do, you just can't stop doing it. You have to find a way to make it work.
I think I'd just be remiss to say that as much as, Julie's reporting and the very brave women who spoke with us and made all the difference in the world, and we thank them very much, that there was also the Palm Beach detective Joe Ricari, who spoke to Julie for the first time, who dedicated a good part of his life to finding these victims and tracking them down and really trying to find some justice. With Jeffrey Epstein, he passed away during the reporting, and I just think, we should always remember him as well, because he was a big part of this, talking for the very first time. I tried to get him on camera, and he wasn't going to do it, but he did let me take a picture of him, and he's a big part of the series too. I just wanted to remember him tonight.
Well, really want to thank the two of you. Julie, we'll be hearing from you at the next panel. Emily, thank you so much for sharing this story. So many people.
Okay, I'm back. Thank you for watching. I hope that was very informative for you. It was really great actually having those two reporters, the people who put their necks out there to come up against and be the voice, the one to stand there to be the voice to allow those women who were trafficked for so long by the so-called, the puppet masters, the people in power, the powers that be. It takes a lot to do that. And the number one thing I'd like you to take away with this is, a lot of people, they look at and they hear these stories and they're like, well, they sound like willing victims. Please understand that either the women, and something tells me it just wasn't women either, okay? Because it's not just women who are trafficked or girls who are trafficked. Boys are very much trafficked also. Where I work, it was 174 beds, the lockdown adult psych facility, and 40% of them were boys who were all sexually molested also, okay? So that's why I really want people to understand, especially with this whole thing of they're pushing this whole man-hating thing now, especially white man-hating. And guess what? Half of those boys were Caucasian also, that were molested, abused, and trafficked. So that is just a misnomer, and it's just an agenda, a false, horrible agenda being pushed to cause separation, which we're going to go into, because that's something huge with Generation Z, and they're pushing that, divide and conquer thing. So this is what these women had to go up against, these reporters had to go up against. Billionaires, the so-called powers that be, the puppet masters of this world. They had to go up against that because of love, straight up, because of love. Why do you do what you do? Because of love. The love of justice. Okay? The takeaway is to understand that these kids at the time were being manipulated because they came from backgrounds of poverty. They stalked schools. They knew their victims. And a lot of victims also, part of them were models too. I was in the modeling world. Okay, I worked in California on the West Coast, LA and Hollywood. I also was in Europe, and I'm originally from New York. I'm Haitian born Caribbean, if you can't tell. My home's a bit festive, okay? But I grew up in New York City since I was a baby, and I was in the modeling real early, in my late teens, okay? And it is very much like that. You are groomed. You are groomed, and it's made very clear, very early, that you will not succeed unless they get what they want from you, okay? And the ones who are helping doing your grooming are girls just like you, who are like, hey, look what I have. I have this amazing condo and I have a BMW in the driveway. Don't you want that too? Just go giving a massage. Do you know how many times I heard that word, especially out in LA? I ran away every time. But that's how it goes. That is the world. And also when it comes to modeling and when you're under 18 as a model, your parents have to sign guardianship over to the modeling agency. I was a bit crazy, okay? My mother did not want me to be a model. She's very religious, still is, very Catholic. So I was straight up told by the agent, and it was one of the top modeling agencies in New York City, told me to forge my mom's signature. And I did. But lucky for me, at the time I didn't think I was lucky. Lucky for me, my older sister found out and gave me away. I caught a hell of a beating for it. But I'm glad she did it. I'm glad she did it. I did continue modeling once after I became 18. You know, in the lower levels, they don't bug you as much. They still bother you, and it's still a fight. I know a few girls got raped in my modeling agency in New York when I was signed. And it's very different when you're a signed model and when you're not a signed model. I was signed, contracted. Once you're contracted, it's like they try to own you, mind, body, and soul, literally. Never mind the weigh-ins every week. And hey, you know, do some coke and lose some weight this week. They straight up tell you that, okay? I never have. I've never even smoked a cigarette or drank a beer. Okay, so I wasn't a very compliant little model, let's put it that way. My career was in spits and spats, you know, because of my attitude. I wasn't easily duped like that. But many girls are, many guys are, okay, and especially if you feel that's all you have. Lucky for me, you know, I also, you know, had the brains, had the intelligence, and I was in school the entire time, but a lot of these kids aren't. So, you know, tread lightly, have a heart when it comes to criticizing them and thinking, you know, they're willing victims. It may seem like that, but, you know, you'll go as far as giving a massage with your clothes on. Then take off your top. Just be in your bra and underwear. And it's like, you know, they push you a little further and further and further in. That's how it goes. Oh, just be in a two-piece bathing suit. This photographer really likes you. Let him take you out to dinner, to lunch. Been there, done that. With the photographer wants to meet you. Don't you want to be in this magazine? The photographer wants to take you out. Next thing you know, the photographer has 100 arms in the back of a limo, strung out on coke, jumping on top of you. Or you're in the middle of a shoot and their hand slips. It is par for the course. That is the modeling game. Okay? And what do? Do you run screaming? Do you not go back? If you don't go back, you're not going to get paid. They'll drop you from the contract. There's a lot in there. Okay, so have a heart when looking at that. Okay, so stay tuned for part 2. And I'll see you guys in part 2. Peace. We got this. All right, bye.